About 54% of urban South African parents are still not actively saving for their children's education. According to the head of financial education at Old Mutual, this is a concern due to the sharp increases in education inflation. Parents can expect an inflation increase of 9.5% in 2017. So joining us in studio is John Manyike, the head of financial education at Old Mutual. Good to have you in studio, John. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. All right, saving for our children's education. It's a story that's been around for generations. It'll continue to be around, but it's not looking good. Are you saying that we're not saving enough? Parents are not sort of putting that money aside?
Yeah. It's true. I mean, many parents have no clue whatsoever how much it's going to cost them to actually financially support their children throughout their schooling life, including tertiary qualification. And the reason this is so critical, because, I mean, who would want to retire and still have their children depending on them because they couldn't further their studies and couldn't find employment? In fact, there are some studies that do indicate that people who do have a tertiary qualification have a better chance of being employed as compared to people who did not complete high school.
Yeah, you know, and when we look at the numbers, and it is worrying because we look at education inflation in South Africa. So now we're going to talk some numbers.
Yep. It's
higher than that of the price of the consumer price index, and this gap has now widened from 2% in the early 2000s to the current 6%. Explain this to us in layman's terms.
That's a very important number because you know, when you're talking about consumer price index, I mean, this is a tool that's used to calculate the changes in prices of goods and services that consumers pay. Now, and the normal inflation, I mean, if you're looking at about 6.1%, versus the education cost inflation. And when we're talking about education cost, we're talking about the school fees, we're talking about uniform, stationery, it's the textbook, it's transport, it's pocket money. There's a whole lot of things that goes into educating a child. So for a parent who has a child that starts grade R in 2017, can expect to pay anything between 1.3 million up to 2.9 million, depending on whether they're sending them to private school or public school. But the thing is, if you have no clue what that goal is going to be, it's going to be very difficult to save for it.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, educating a child is not a cheap thing to do. It really isn't, but it's a vital thing. And yet, in the introduction, we talk about the fact that 54% of South African parents don't save for their children's education. Why do you think this is? Do you think that because we think, whatever, worry about it, you know, at the end of the school year, at the beginning of the school year, and, you know, we'd rather go on holidays and we'd rather buy them presents and buy ourselves great cars and houses and, you know, be frivolous with our money. Why are we not prioritizing education?
Look, in a South African context, a couple of things come into play. Firstly, issues of over-indebtedness becomes an issue. I mean, over-indebtedness is an enemy of saving. And then you have people who are sandwiched between having to provide for their children as well as their aging parents and extended family. So there's very little to go by. I mean, let's face it, the salary increases have not necessarily been matching our consumer price index over time. And if you're going to have a consumer price index of around 6.1%, and then you have an education cost inflation of 9.5%, so clearly the education cost inflation far outpaces the CPI. So in which case it means it's going to be very difficult for a parent to catch up. And this is why it's very critical for parents to speak to a financial advisor who will assist them with financial planning, because you cannot just rely on the normal savings account at the bank or the traditional education policy. You've got to find something a bit more sophisticated than that. You need a balanced portfolio, and that's why we have to emphasize the value of financial advice.
So there are specific funds out there and policies out there that you take out to save for your child's education.
Yeah,
they're existing.
Absolutely. There's quite a number of savings instruments. I think the rule of thumb there is whatever instrument that you're going to go with, make sure that the return is actually above inflation. Because if you are saving, but the return on your investment is well below inflation, or maybe just matching inflation, you might find it difficult to catch up. And the issue here is that you don't want your money to depreciate. So that's why it's very important to speak to a financial advisor, have a balanced portfolio, make sure that it will actually cater for that need. I mean, there are varsities where the cost could be around 125,000 per annum.
Yeah.
Well, of course, others might be less than that, around 54,000, depending on which university a child is going. I know it's a very sensitive subject in a South African context, but the reality is that parents do need to plan, and we cannot relegate that responsibility of saving for the future of our children.
How much should we save a month for a child's education?
Yeah, it's a very tricky one, because one has to take into account the means issues there. So that's why we always encourage people to speak to a financial advisor. Look at what you can afford.
Yeah.
Look at your appetite to risk, over time, so that an appropriate a solution can be recommended for you.
Yeah, I mean, because it certainly is. I mean, we've got a very diverse earning capacity here in South Africa. So you've got the top end that will play 95,000 Rand a year for a grade R student. That happens.
True.
And then you've got, the other side of the coin, where it's a very different scenario. But the reality is, wherever you find yourself is exactly what you have to put aside for your child.
Absolutely. I think also parents need to make some sacrifices. I mean, if you really want to secure the future of your children, you need to make some bold and some very aggressive moves on your part. I mean, even if it means cutting down on eating out, or maybe taking a lunchbox to work as opposed to buying takeaways and so on. But whatever it is, then you certainly need to make some sacrifices to actually reach that goal.
Goodness me. Well, there you have it. I'm going to go grab my lunchbox now and start eating breakfast out of it. But seriously, it is. It's a reality. We have to think of our children, their future, and education is expensive, particularly private education here in South Africa. It really is. It's a big cost for us. John Manyike, thank you for the advice here on the program. Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual. All right, let us take a break here on the program, and we're going to bring your news at 8 to you. Stay tuned.